Now, if you're having problems with your sewing machine, I'm going to go over some of the most common ones today. Things like lots of threads tangling underneath your fabric. That's sometimes known as nesting. Then you have the problem of skip stitches. I'm going to show you why that might happen when you're sewing. Or then the tension is completely wrong and you don't know what you're doing for it to happen. So the first thing you need to do is make sure you threaded your machine properly, making sure the top thread and the bottom thread are in properly. So I'm going to put the link above and you can follow that link. That will definitely show you the kind of things you need to be doing. Things like making sure the presser foot is lifted up. When the presser foot's lifted up, the tension discs open. So when you put the top thread through the machine, that's going to allow the thread to go fully engaged inside the tension so that when you do alter the dial, you know that it's working. Also making sure that your bobbin is in the right way. If your bobbin goes the right way, then you are not going to have lots of tangles and clunks that commonly happen. The other thing about bobbin is making sure you're using the one that came with your machine. Don't go out and buy the wrong size. You need to make sure that when you buy new bobbins that you're buying them for the machine that you're working with. And as for the problems that you're experiencing, let's go through some of them right now. Just talk to you quickly about threads. It's so important to use a good quality thread in your sewing machine. It makes the difference between a good stitch and a good working machine. Like these overlocker threads. These are moon threads from Coats, and then these sew all threads come from Gutterman, and again Coats have a sewing thread too. There's a price difference between the Gutterman and the Coats threads, but you want to get a good quality thread. So the first problem we're going to look at is, why does fabric pucker? Now I'm going to just grab this sheet of fabric and I will stitch a row of straight stitches. And you can already see there that the fabric is sort of gathered. Let me pull that out. Needles that came with this machine are in a packet like this, and I have one already on the machine. These are all a size 90/14. 90 is 0.9 of a millimetre, and for me that would be something that I would sew on denim. When you're sewing everyday cottons like these, then you want to be using something a little bit lighter, like a 70. So you want to avoid things like puckering by making sure that you use the right needle for the thickness of fabric you're sewing, and make sure you match the thread accordingly. So what's happened is, because that needle's too thick for this fabric, we get what's known as puckering. So the fabric starts to sort of gather, doesn't it? And that's not really what you want. Now if I change that needle, and before I change the needle, place the fabric underneath and take that one out with a size 70 and pop that in. And make sure you use a screwdriver to tighten that in. Okay, and that's much better. Let's try another line. So there you go, you can see a massive difference in the stitching and the amount of puckering that you're going to get with a thinner needle. So the puckering issue is usually down to the thickness of the needle next to the thickness of the fabric. So I'm going to make sure that I choose the right needle for the project. Now, if you ever experience problems like this, lots and lots of tangles in your thread, this is a really easy solution. There are two possible reasons this will happen. The first reason is because the tension dial up above here has been changed. So you don't want to be working on a low number. You want to be working on the numbers that are highlighted by the machine. So in this case, can you see how there's no box around the lower numbers? And then we have a box around the 4, the 5, the 6, and then there are no boxes around the 7, 8 or 9. And the reason is because when they made this machine, they set it up to work best on those 3 numbers. So I need to make sure I've set the number to so to the midpoint. So the 4, 5, 6, I'll leave it at 5. The second reason for all of that is that this thread isn't actually in the tension discs properly, and I can feel it's very loose. And the reason will be when I threaded up machine, I didn't lift up the presser foot here. So make sure this presser foot is lifted and I can have a gap under there. I'll thread this back up using the number 5, and if I put that thread in, so the two reasons that, so there we go. So the reasons why we didn't have the right tension on the thread was because the thread wasn't installed into the machine properly, and the tension dial was actually down to 0, which means there was no tension on the thread. The discs were not pressing together. Now what I want to show you here, if I remove the foot, is the needle plate. This area here, this is where the needle will go in to catch the bobbin thread. You don't want any scratches or needle marks from your needle there. If you do, just make sure you're in the habit of putting your needle in properly and making sure you screw that tight. If you don't, that will get loose, that will hit your needle plate, and it could potentially break into lots of little pieces, causing damage to your machine and, in a worst case scenario, to you. So make sure you screw this in properly using your screwdriver. Has that ever happened to you? Let me explain what happened. I've got the needle at the highest point. I've got a nice long thread. And then I stitch. Get the needle out. And cut that thread away like that. And that's fine. And then we go again, and then I've lost the thread. And it's really simple what's happened, and it goes back down to the basics. What you want to do is make sure not only is the needle up at the highest point, but make sure this take-up lever's up at the highest point. When that take-up lever's up at the highest point, I can give you the smallest amount of thread. So I've just got a small bit of thread, not a long tail. And the machine will stitch. Get that hook back to the top. And I can cut an even smaller thread there and stitch. But if I don't release the fabric with the hook at the top, what happens is the machine won't release the thread, and it gets in a tangle because the stitch hasn't finished being formed, and I end up with lots of threads underneath. But then, as well as that, when I go back to stitch, I lose my thread. So be careful when you finish your stitch, make sure your hook's at the top, and when you start sewing, make sure the hook's at the top. Now I'm going to stitch a row of zigzag. There we go. I've got a nice neat row of zigzags. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to demonstrate how you can end up with skip stitches. So when you put your needle in the machine, you want to make sure your needle's in all the way up. I'm just going to place that fabric there so I don't drop the needle into the needle plate, and hopefully you can see it go in to the stopper. So I'm going to not push it all the way up to the stopper. So it's about a millimetre below. And then we'll stitch our row of stitches. It's just not happy. It just doesn't want to stitch. And you can see I managed to get a zigzag. I'm going to push the needle back up a tiny bit more. And that's really done a lot better. It's gone all the way, but I've got a twisted zigzag there and I've got a missed zigzag there. And it looks like I've got a missed zigzag there at the bottom as well, which was just about to happen. Let's try that again. So having your needle in fully makes such a difference if you get skip stitches like that. Now I'm going to push the needle in properly all the way, get that in fully, and I'm actually going to use the screwdriver to tighten that up. So there you have it, a few very simple problems resolved very, very easily and very, very quickly. Now, in the case of the timing, you might find that you need a mechanic and you might need to send your machine away for repair. But if you're feeling a little bit brave, have a look at some of my other videos. I show you how to repair the timing on a sewing machine. I also show you how to adjust the needle position on sewing machines. These techniques are very similar on all sewing machines, so have a look at those. But please take care. It does require patience and it does require some skill and knowledge. And if you don't feel up to it, there's no shame in sending it out to a mechanic for repair. So hopefully the video has resolved some of the issues that you may be experiencing. Definitely leave a comment below. Let me know if this video helped. And if you like the video, why don't you leave a thumbs up or even subscribe to the channel? And if you'd like to support the channel, you can either become a member or even send me a coffee. I'll put the links in the description below. Thank you very much for watching. Have a lovely day and happy sewing. Right, time to get on with my project.